The research ship called Horizon floated in space above a green and orange planet. The planet was named Kepler 442b, and it was full of life. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the big window and looked down at the forest below. The trees moved in the wind like waves on an ocean. His team had been studying this planet for 3 weeks now. They were not allowed to touch anything or go near the animals because of strict rules from the Galactic Council. Jake was a tall man with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. He had spent years in space, but this planet was special. The life here had grown without any contact with Earth. Everything was new and different. His radio made a sound. Lieutenant Amy Chen was calling him. Her voice came through clear and urgent. She told him that one of their small flying robots had crashed in the northern forest. They needed to get it back before the local animals found it. The robot had important technology inside. If the creatures on the planet found it, it could cause big problems. Jake let out a long breath. The robots were not supposed to crash, but accidents happened. He told Amy to prepare the small shuttle. He would take a team down to get it. Within an hour, Jake was heading down to the planet's surface. Dr. Lisa Hayes came with him. She was a scientist who studied alien life. Marcus Cole also came along. He was the security officer, a careful man who always watched for danger. Their shuttle entered the atmosphere, and the ship shook a little as they flew through the clouds. They landed in an open area of grass about half a kilometer from where the robot had crashed. When Jake stepped out of the shuttle, the first thing he noticed was the smell. It was sweet like flowers, but also sharp like lightning. The air was thicker than Earth air and felt warm against his skin. They walked into the forest. The trees here were strange and beautiful. Their leaves looked like they were made of crystal. When the wind blew through them, they made soft musical sounds like wind chimes. Blue glowing mushrooms grew on the ground, lighting their path. Strange insects flew past, making buzzing sounds that were almost like singing. Marcus kept checking his scanner. After about 15 minutes of walking, he stopped. He said there was movement ahead. Large animals. Multiple contacts. His voice was tight with concern. They moved forward more carefully now. Jake could hear sounds in the forest. Breaking branches. Low rumbling noises. The smell of something wild and strong. They came to a small clearing and stopped. The crashed robot was there, half buried in soft moss. But they were not alone. A pack of creatures surrounded the robot. These were clearly the top predators of this world. Jake had seen pictures of them from orbit, but seeing them up close was completely different. They were huge, standing about 2 meters tall at the shoulder. Their bodies were covered in fur that was dark blue, almost black, but it shimmered with rainbow colors when they moved. Their faces looked somewhat like wolves, but the eyes were different. They had 6 eyes, 3 pairs arranged across their faces. The eyes gleamed with obvious intelligence. Their mouths had many sharp teeth. Jake could see them clearly because one of the creatures had its lips pulled back. Their paws were big with claws that could slide in and out like a cat's claws. Deep marks in the dirt showed how sharp those claws were. Lisa whispered that these were the Vixra. That was the name the research team had given them. They had watched these creatures from space but never been this close. Her voice shook a little with excitement and fear. The biggest Vixra was clearly the leader of the pack. It turned all 6 of its eyes toward the humans. For a long moment, nobody moved. The leader's lips curled back, showing more of those impressive teeth. But the expression did not seem entirely aggressive. It seemed more like the creature was studying them, trying to figure out what they were. The pack was circling around the crashed robot. Jake watched them carefully. They were not trying to destroy it or eat it. They were examining it. One Vixra used its claws very gently to turn the robot over. Another one sniffed at the metal parts. A third one tapped it carefully with one paw. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. These creatures were not just acting on instinct. They were curious. They were investigating. They were being intelligent. Then something happened that changed everything. A smaller Vixra came running out from behind the leader. It was clearly young, maybe the equivalent of a teenager in human years. It had oversized paws that it had not quite grown into yet. Its movements were bouncy and uncoordinated in the way young animals move. The young Vixra ignored a warning growl from the leader. It came straight toward the humans with the fearless curiosity that only the young seem to have. Jake could see that this youngster had lighter-colored fur than the adults. Its eyes were bright and interested. The young creature came right up to Jake. It lowered its head and sniffed at his boots with great interest. Its nose was cold and wet. Jake could hear it breathing, quick, excited breaths. Then, without warning, the young Vixra opened its mouth and bit down on the reinforced toe of Jake's boot. The bite was not hard. The creature's teeth scraped against the tough material but did not damage it. This was not an attack. Jake had spent enough time around dogs and wolves back on Earth to recognize play behavior when he saw it. The young one was testing, exploring, playing. Behind him, Jake heard his team react. Marcus's hand moved toward his weapon. Lisa sucked in a sharp breath. But Jake held up his hand in a signal to stop. Do not move. Do not threaten. Jake studied the young Vixra's body language. Despite the alien nature of the creature, some things were universal. The youngster's ears were pointed forward with interest, not fear. Its tail was loose and relaxed, not stiff with aggression. There was a slight bounce in its posture. Every sign pointed to play, not danger. Jake made a decision. It was based on instinct and years of experience with Earth predators. It might be completely wrong, but something deep inside him said this was the right move. He got down on one knee, bringing himself closer to the young Vixra's level. He moved slowly so as not to startle it. The creature watched him with all 6 eyes. Jake reached out with his gloved hand and very gently tapped the youngster on its nose. Just a light touch. Then he pulled his hand back and pretended to bite at the air near the creature's ear. He made soft clicking sounds with his tongue the way he might play with a puppy. For 3 long heartbeats, nothing happened. The young Vixra froze. The entire pack froze. Every single creature stopped moving and stared. Jake could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Maybe he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe he had just offended them or threatened them in some way he did not understand. Then the young Vixra's tail started to move, back and forth, back and forth. It was wagging. The movement was not exactly like a dog's wag, but the meaning was clear. Excitement, happiness, joy. The youngster dropped into a play bow. Its rear end went up in the air while its front legs stretched out in front. It made a series of sounds that were like chirping mixed with barking. The sounds were high and excited. Jake heard Marcus behind him asking what he was doing. His voice was tight with stress. But Jake was focused on the young Vixra in front of him. He said quietly that he was making friends. At least he hoped he was making friends. The youngster jumped forward more enthusiastically now. It swatted at Jake's knee with one paw but kept its claws carefully pulled in. Jake responded by gently pushing the creature's shoulder the way he would play with a large dog back home. The young Vixra spun around in an excited circle. It was clearly delighted. The leader of the pack was moving now. The huge creature approached slowly and deliberately. Each step was careful and measured. It came close enough that Jake could feel the heat radiating from its body. The creature was like a living furnace. Jake could smell it too. The scent was strange but not unpleasant. It reminded him of cinnamon mixed with the smell of air after a lightning storm. The massive predator lowered all 3 pairs of heads until they were level with Jake's face. This close, Jake could see the individual hairs in its fur. He could see his own reflection in those 6 intelligent eyes. The creature studied him for a long time. Jake stayed as still as he could. He let himself be examined. He tried to keep his breathing calm and his body relaxed. The leader sniffed at Jake's face and neck. Its breath was hot against his skin. Then the creature did something that made Jake's heart stop. It opened its huge jaws and very slowly, very carefully, closed them around Jake's forearm. Not biting, not applying pressure, just holding. Jake understood what this was. He had seen wolves do something similar. It was a gesture of trust. The leader was showing that it could harm Jake easily but was choosing not to. It was a test but also a gift. An offer of peace. Very slowly, Jake lifted his other hand. He reached up toward one of the leader's heads. His hand was shaking slightly, but he kept moving. He scratched gently behind one of the creature's ears. The effect was immediate. The leader's 6 eyes widened, then slowly closed. A deep sound came from its chest. It was like a purr mixed with a very low growl. The sound was so deep Jake could feel it vibrating through his bones. The leader released Jake's arm and pressed the side of its large head against Jake's chest. The movement was so strong it nearly knocked Jake over. Lisa's voice came from behind him. She sounded like she was crying and laughing at the same time. She said that Jake had just become part of the pack. The next few hours passed like a dream. Jake remained in the clearing with the Vixra pack, while Lisa and Marcus carefully retrieved the crashed robot. The pack members seemed far more interested in the humans now than in the piece of technology that had brought them here. The young Vixra that Jake had played with refused to leave his side. The creature followed him everywhere he moved. Sometimes it would playfully bite at his boots again or bat at his legs with its large paws, but the claws always stayed pulled in. It never tried to hurt him. Every time the youngster did this, Jake would respond with gentle play. He would tap its nose or pretend to grab at its ears. They were building a connection that needed no words. Jake found himself thinking of the young one as Scout. The name just seemed to fit. Scout was clearly the adventurous type, the first to investigate new things, the bravest of the young pack members. The pack leader was magnificent to watch up close. Jake guessed the creature weighed around 300 kilograms, maybe more. It moved with power but also with grace. Every action seemed thoughtful and deliberate. The leader would watch the interactions between Jake and Scout with obvious interest. Sometimes it would make soft rumbling sounds that seemed like approval. Jake began to notice the social structure of the pack. The leader was not just the strongest or most aggressive. It was the most careful and thoughtful. It made decisions slowly after observing situations. The other pack members looked to it for guidance and seemed to respect its authority completely. Marcus kept glancing at the sky. The alien sun was getting lower, and the light was turning orange and purple. He said they should head back to the shuttle. They did not know how the Vixra would behave at night. It might not be safe, but the pack leader had other ideas. As Jake and his team prepared to leave, the massive creature moved to block their path. It was not aggressive or threatening. It simply stood in their way and would not let them pass. The leader looked from Jake to the darkening forest and then back to Jake. The meaning was perfectly clear even without words. It was not safe for them to travel through the forest in the dark. Lisa said with barely controlled excitement that the leader wanted them to stay. This was an unprecedented opportunity. They could learn so much. Jake considered the situation. The shuttle was half a kilometer away through forest that would soon be pitch black. The Vixra obviously knew this terrain well. They lived here. The humans were strangers who could easily get lost or injured or encounter other dangerous creatures. He made his decision. They would stay for the night. But they would sleep in shifts and keep watch. The leader seemed to understand what Jake had decided. It turned and began walking toward a rock formation at the edge of the clearing. The pack followed, and Jake signaled for his team to follow as well. The rocks formed a natural shelter, an overhang that would provide protection from wind and rain. The ground underneath was smooth, worn down by countless bodies resting there over time. Old bones from previous meals were scattered around, picked completely clean. As darkness fell completely, the pack settled down in a loose circle around the humans. It was a protective formation. The strongest warriors of the pack took positions facing outward toward the forest. The younger members stayed toward the center near the humans. Scout curled up right against Jake's leg. The young Vixra was incredibly warm. Its fur felt soft under the rougher outer layer. Jake found himself absently stroking Scout's head and back the way he would pet a dog. Scout's rumbling purr grew louder and deeper. The sound was soothing in the darkness. Lisa was recording everything with her small devices. She whispered that this was incredible. The pack had completely accepted them. Or at least they had completely accepted Jake. She said his instinct to respond with play instead of fear or aggression had been exactly right. Jake explained his thinking. Predator species that form packs almost always have play behavior. It is how they bond with each other. How young ones learn to hunt and fight without actually hurting each other. How adults establish and maintain social relationships without constant violence. He had taken a guess that any intelligent pack predator would understand play. It seemed his guess had been correct. Marcus said Jake could not have known for certain that it would work with an alien species. It had been a huge risk, Jake shrugged. He said some things seemed to be universal. Play exists on Earth in so many different types of animals. Mammals, birds, even some reptiles and fish. It is not really about biology or evolution on one specific planet. It is about intelligence and social bonds. Any species smart enough to be curious about human technology would probably be smart enough to understand the basic concept of play. Through the long night, Jake kept watch during his shift and observed the pack. Their communication was complex and layered. They used sounds ranging from very low rumbles to high chirps and everything in between. They used body language in ways that were sometimes similar to Earth animals and sometimes completely alien. They also seemed to use scent marking, though Jake's human nose could not pick up the subtleties. The pack leader got up several times during the night and made rounds. It checked on each member of the pack with obvious care. It would sniff them, sometimes nuzzle them gently with one of its heads, make soft sounds. When it came to the humans, it did the same thing. It sniffed them carefully to make sure they were all right. Then it did something that surprised Jake. The leader marked the rocks around where the humans were resting. It was creating a scent boundary. A clear message. Lisa noticed it too. She whispered that the leader was claiming them. It was telling the rest of the pack and any other creatures in the forest that these humans were under its protection. They were part of the pack's territory now. As the alien dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of green and gold that Earth never saw, Jake felt like he understood something profound. The Vixera were not just animals operating on instinct. They were people. They had their own culture, their own social rules, their own form of intelligence that was different from human intelligence but no less valid. And by choosing to communicate through play and trust rather than through technology or force, he had been accepted into their world. Scout stirred as light filled the clearing. The young Vixera stretched in a way that reminded Jake of a cat. All 6 eyes opened and focused on Jake. Scout made a soft chirping sound that seemed like a greeting. Then, with what could only be interpreted as deliberate intent, Scout bit Jake's boot again, exactly the same as yesterday. A test, a question, a game. Jake was ready this time. He smiled and made his playful bite back toward Scout's ear. The young Vixera's whole body wiggled with pure joy. Its tail wagged so hard its entire rear end moved from side to side. Other young pack members began to wake up. They saw Scout playing with Jake and came over with cautious curiosity. One by one they approached. Jake showed Marcus and Lisa how to interact with them, how to read the body language, how to respond to play invitations without being threatening or too rough. Soon all 3 humans were engaged in careful play with half a dozen young Vixera. The adult pack members watched with expressions that looked remarkably like amusement. The pack leader came to sit beside Jake as he gently wrestled with Scout. The massive predator settled its bulk close enough that its shoulder pressed against Jake's shoulder. Then it began to make sounds, a series of vocalizations that ranged from deep rumbles to medium chirps to high whistles. After each sound, the leader would pause and look at Jake. It was clearly waiting for something. Lisa's voice was thick with emotion when she spoke. She said the leader was trying to teach Jake. It was trying to teach him the Vixera language. Jake listened carefully and tried to copy the sounds. His human vocal cords could not quite match some of the tones. The very low rumbles were especially difficult, but he tried his best. When he got a sound wrong, the leader would patiently repeat it. When he got close to the right sound, the leader would rumble with approval and move on to the next one. Other pack members gathered around to watch this lesson. Some of them joined in, repeating sounds to help Jake learn. It felt formal and structured like a classroom. Jake was being formally educated in the basics of Vixera communication. By the time the sun was fully above the horizon, Jake had learned several basic vocalizations. One sound meant safe or good. Another meant danger or bad. A third seemed to mean pack or family or group. There was one that meant food. Another that seemed to be a question marker, turning any other sound into a question. When Jake successfully used the sound for pack or family, the leader pressed its massive head against Jake's chest again. The deep purring sound it made vibrated through Jake's entire body. He felt warmth that had nothing to do with the creature's body heat. This was acceptance. This was friendship. Lisa was already thinking about the reports they would need to write. This changed everything about first contact protocols. The Galactic Council had rules upon rules about how to approach new species. Most of it focused on technology and careful linguistic analysis and maintaining distance. But sometimes the best way to communicate was not through complex technology. It was through simple universal behaviors: play, trust, physical closeness. These things transcended species barriers. But Jake was not thinking about reports or protocols. He was focused on... The pack leader walked toward the cliff face with purpose. Scout stayed pressed against Jake's side as they followed. Jake could feel the young Vixera's excitement in the way it moved. They were going somewhere important. Somewhere special. Dozens of Vixera watched the humans approach. Some looked curious, tilting their heads and watching with bright eyes. Others seemed cautious, keeping their distance and watching carefully. A few of the youngest cubs tried to come closer, but were gently held back by adult guardians. Jake understood. These people were being protective of their children while still remaining open to the strangers their leader had brought. The variety in the population was remarkable. Jake saw Vixra with fur ranging from the deep blue-black of the pack leader to lighter blues and even some with silver-gray coloring. Some were massive like the leader, while others were smaller and more lean. The cubs came in every size, from tiny newborns to gangly teenagers like Scout. This was a complex, multi-generational society. The pack leader stopped at the entrance to the largest cave. It turned to look back at Jake and the other humans. The message was clear in its posture and the way it held its heads. This place is important. Show respect. Be careful. Jake nodded, even though he did not know if the gesture meant anything to the Vixra. He made himself smaller by crouching down slightly. It was a gesture of non-aggression he hoped would be understood. The pack leader rumbled softly in what sounded like approval. Then it turned and entered the cave. Jake followed with Lisa and Marcus close behind. The cave entrance was tall and wide. As they moved deeper, the light from outside faded, but Jake's eyes adjusted. There was some light coming from more of those bioluminescent fungi growing on the cave walls. The soft blue glow was just enough to see by. Then Jake saw the walls themselves and stopped walking. His breath caught in his throat. The walls were decorated. Someone had painted on them using pigments in shades of red, yellow, and black. The images were not sophisticated like human art, but they were clearly intentional. They showed Vixra hunting in coordinated groups. They showed gatherings of many Vixra together. Some images seemed to show important events, perhaps historical moments in the community's past. Marcus spoke quietly. He said they have culture. They have art. They record their history. Lisa was already recording everything with her devices. Her hands shook slightly with excitement. This was evidence that could not be disputed. The Vixra were not just intelligent animals. They were a civilization. The cave went deep into the cliff. The main chamber branched into smaller chambers and alcoves. In these spaces, Jake saw more evidence of complex society. Smooth stones had been arranged into comfortable sleeping areas. Different alcoves seemed to belong to different family groups. In carved spaces in the walls, various objects were stored. Interesting rocks and crystals, tools made from bone and stone, even what looked like toys for the cubs. Everything was organized. Everything had its place. This was not a random animal den. This was a home. Many homes, a whole community living together. In the deepest part of the main cave, Jake saw a group of Vixra gathered in a circle. They were arranged around a single individual who lay on a raised platform of smooth stones. As Jake's eyes adjusted more, he could see this Vixra more clearly. It was old, ancient. Its fur was almost entirely silver white. Its body was covered in scars, some old and faded, others more recent. Despite its obvious age, its 6 eyes were bright and alert. This was the matriarch. Jake knew it instantly. This was the true leader of the community. Not just a pack leader, but the elder, the wise one, the ultimate authority. The pack leader approached the matriarch and began to communicate. It used sounds Jake had not heard before, more complex and nuanced than the basic vocalizations he had been learning. It also used subtle body language, positions of the heads and tail that clearly had meaning. The matriarch listened carefully. Occasionally, her 6 eyes would shift to look at the humans with penetrating intelligence. When the pack leader finished speaking, the matriarch was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, with obvious difficulty, she began to stand. Immediately, several younger Vixra moved to help her, but she waved them away with gentle bumps of her heads. She was old and moving hurt, but she was still strong enough to move on her own. The matriarch walked toward Jake with slow, measured steps. Each movement looked painful, but she did not stop. The gathered Vixra watched in silence. Jake could feel the weight of the moment. Whatever was about to happen was important, very important. When she reached Jake, the matriarch did what the pack leader had done on that first meeting. She carefully took Jake's forearm in her jaws. But she held it longer. Jake felt the slight pressure of her teeth through his protective suit. She was not breaking the skin, but she was making contact. Real contact. This was a more serious test than the pack leaders had been. The matriarch was deciding something crucial. She was deciding whether humans could be trusted with knowledge of this place, whether they could be trusted with the safety of the cubs playing in the caves behind her. Whether they could be trusted with the survival of her people, Jake remained perfectly still. His heart pounded hard in his chest. He could feel sweat on his forehead despite the cool cave air. But he kept his body relaxed. He met the matriarch's 6 eyes and tried to convey everything he felt. Respect for her and her people, wonder at what they had built, curiosity to learn more, friendship freely offered, and most importantly, a promise. A promise to do no harm, a promise to protect rather than exploit. He did not know if she could read human facial expressions. He did not know if any of what he was trying to communicate was getting through. But he had to try. Long moments passed. The only sound was quiet breathing and the soft drip of water somewhere deep in the cave. Then the matriarch released Jake's arm. She moved forward and pressed her forehead against his. All 6 of her eyes closed. A deep sound came from her chest, deeper than any Jake had heard before. It resonated through the cave like a bell. Jake felt the vibration pass through his entire body. The gathered Vixra erupted in sound. Dozens of voices joined in a chorus of approval. The noise was overwhelming in the enclosed space. Scout bounded forward and jumped up, putting paws on Jake's chest. The young one's enthusiasm nearly knocked Jake over. The pack leader stood nearby, and Jake could see pride in its bearing. Pride in Scout for being the first to approach the humans. Pride in Jake for proving worthy of trust. Lisa's voice was choked with emotion when she spoke. She said Jake had been accepted by the Elder. Did he understand what this meant? They had been invited into the heart of Vixra society. They were being treated as equals. Over the hours that followed, the Vixra showed the humans everything. They demonstrated how they hunted using coordinated tactics that required planning and communication. Different pack members took different roles. Some were drivers who herded prey. Others were ambushers who lay in wait. Still others were finishers who made the actual kill. It was complex and required trust and understanding between pack members. They showed how they cared for their young. This was perhaps most remarkable to Jake. Child rearing was a community responsibility. All adults helped care for all cubs regardless of blood relationship. Cubs who lost parents were immediately adopted by others. Elderly Vixra who could no longer hunt were still valued for teaching and watching over the youngest cubs. Nobody was left behind or abandoned. They showed their food storage systems. Meat was cached in cool, deep parts of the cave network where it would keep longer. The locations of good hunting grounds were remembered and shared. Knowledge was passed down through generations. But most importantly, they played. Young Vixra initiated games with the humans. Chase games where Jake found himself running through the clearing with a dozen cubs pursuing him in mock hunt. Wrestling games where Marcus ended up flat on his back with 3 adolescent Vixra, gently pinning him down while he laughed helplessly. Hide and seek where Lisa discovered that Vixra were very good at hiding and finding. The adult Vixra watched these games with clear enjoyment. Some of the younger adults joined in. Even some of the elders seemed to smile if such an expression was possible on their alien faces. Jake sat down to rest after a particularly energetic chase game. Scout immediately curled up beside him. Several other young Vixra joined them, creating a pile of warm fur and happy sounds. The pack leader came and lay down nearby. Adult warriors settled into a protective circle around the playing cubs and resting humans. Jake studied the community around him and began to see patterns. The pack leader was responsible for external matters, hunting, defense, relations with other packs. But the matriarch handled internal community issues, disputes between members, decisions about the use of shared resources, teaching and preserving history and culture. But beyond these two, there were other specialists. Jake watched one particular Vixra that seemed to focus almost entirely on the youngest cubs. It was endlessly patient, gentle, and watchful. A professional caregiver. Another Vixra seemed to be the best hunter, the one others looked to for guidance during hunts. There was one that seemed to be a historian of sorts, spending time with the cave paintings and teaching cubs by showing them the images and acting out the stories. This was not just pack behavior. This was civ. 3 weeks had passed since that first encounter in the forest. Jake had returned to the horizon, but he came down to the planet's surface every single day. Sometimes he stayed for just a few hours. Other times he stayed overnight in the caves with the pack. Each visit deepened the bonds between humans and Vixra. Jake had learned much more of their language now. He could communicate basic ideas and understand much of what they said to him. The Vixra had also learned some human words. It was slow progress, but it was real communication. More importantly, the friendship had grown beyond words. It was in the way the pack greeted him, in the way they included him in their daily activities, in the way they trusted him with their cubs. Scout had grown noticeably in those 3 weeks. The young Vixra was more coordinated now. Its paws no longer seemed quite so oversized. Its movements were more confident. But Scout's attachment to Jake had not changed at all. Every time Jake arrived, Scout would race across the clearing and tackle him with enthusiastic affection. Every time Jake had to leave, Scout would watch sadly until the shuttle disappeared into the sky. Today, when Jake arrived, something was wrong. He knew it the moment he stepped out of the shuttle. The usual sounds of the community were absent. No cubs playing, no adults calling to each other. Instead, there was tension in the air like the feeling before a storm. The pack leader met Jake at the edge of the clearing. The massive Vixra's body language was all wrong. Every muscle was tense. Its ears were flattened. Its lips were pulled back, showing teeth. But this was not directed at Jake. The leader was afraid, angry, worried. Jake used the Vixra vocalization for danger with a questioning tone. "What is wrong? What is the danger?" The pack leader responded with a complex series of sounds and gestures. Jake's language skills were still limited, but he caught the important parts. Something bad. Coming soon. From the sky. From above, Jake's blood went cold. From the sky. That could only mean one thing. Another ship. He pulled out his communicator and called the horizon immediately. Lisa answered right away. Her voice was tight with stress. She said they had been trying to reach him. A ship had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the star system. The ship was registered as a merchant vessel called the Golden Prospect. But its flight path and behavior were all wrong. It was heading straight for Kepler 442b, and it was not responding to any hails or communication attempts. Marcus's voice cut in. He said one word: poachers. Jake felt sick to his stomach. He had known this might happen. Despite all their security measures, despite the classified nature of their research, someone had found out about the Vixra. Information always leaked eventually. And exotic predator species from newly discovered worlds sold for enormous amounts of money on the black market. There were always people willing to break laws for that kind of profit. Jake asked how long until the ship arrived at the planet. Lisa calculated quickly. About 6 hours until they reach orbit. If they deploy to the surface, immediately add another hour. 7 hours total, 7 hours. Jake looked at the gathered Vixra, at Scout pressing against his leg in obvious distress, at the matriarch being helped out of the main cave by younger members, at the cubs being herded into protective groups by worried parents. They knew something was wrong. They could sense the fear and tension. Jake asked for options. What could they do? Lisa suggested transmitting a distress signal, getting council authorities to the system. But Marcus pointed out the obvious problem. The nearest council patrol was 3 days away at best. By the time help arrived, the poachers would have already captured whatever they came for. They would jump back to faster-than-light travel and disappear. It happened all the time. Poachers were good at their work. Jake asked what if they interfered directly. The Horizon had defensive weapons. They could try to disable the poacher ship. Stop them from landing! There was a long pause. Then Lisa spoke carefully. Her voice was pained. She said that would be a violation of multiple council regulations. The Horizon was a research vessel, not a military ship. If they attacked another vessel, especially in what the poachers would claim was just a commercial dispute, there could be serious legal consequences. Jake could be charged with piracy. The entire crew could face criminal prosecution, Jake said, but they were planning to kidnap sentient beings. How was that not worse? Lisa explained the terrible truth. The Vixra were not officially recognized as sentient yet. Their reports had been filed, but the bureaucratic process took time. Right now, according to official council records, the Vixra were still classified as exotic fauna. Intelligent fauna, yes. Protected fauna, yes. But not legally persons. What the poachers were planning was definitely illegal. There were laws about taking animals from survey worlds. But it was not kidnapping. Not legally. Not yet. Jake wanted to scream. He wanted to break something. These ridiculous legal definitions were going to doom his friends. He looked at Scout, who was watching him with trust in all 6 eyes. The young Vixra believed Jake would protect them. They all did. Jake said he did not care about the law. He was not going to let this happen. He asked Marcus if the Horizon's weapons could disable the poacher ship. Marcus said probably, but he asked Jake to think carefully. Was he really willing to commit what would legally be an act of piracy? Was he willing to risk criminal charges in prison? Jake looked around at the Vixra community, at the Cubs, at the Elders, at Scout pressed against his leg, at the pack leader watching him with those intelligent eyes. He thought about the cave paintings, the careful social structures, the way they cared for each other. These were people. They deserved protection. Yes, Jake was willing to risk everything for them, but before he could say so, Lisa spoke again. She said she might have another idea, a way to protect the Vixra without attacking the poachers directly. Jake told her to explain quickly. They did not have much time. Lisa said the poachers would scan for life signs when they arrived. That is how they would locate the Vixra to capture them. But what if there were no life signs to detect? The cave system went very deep into the cliff. The rock was full of minerals that interfered with sensors. If the Vixra went deep enough into the caves and stayed very still, they might not show up on the poacher scans. Jake asked what would happen if the poachers came down to the surface anyway. If they searched on foot, Lisa said that is where the humans would come in. They would be here conducting legitimate research. They had every legal right to be on the surface, and they would not let the poachers pass them. They could not stop the poachers from landing. That would be legal interference, but they could make it very difficult and legally complicated for the poachers to actually capture anything, especially if everything was being recorded and transmitted to council servers in real time. It was not a perfect plan, but it might work. Jake turned to the pack leader and tried to explain using the limited Vixra language he knew. Hide, go deep into caves, stay quiet, stay still, danger from sky. Humans will help protect. The pack leader understood. Intelligence shone in its eyes. It began barking commands to the community. The Vixra responded immediately. This was a species that had survived as apex predators for thousands of years. They understood danger. They understood the need to hide when facing a threat too large to fight. Within minutes, the entire community was mobilizing. Adult Vixra began herding cubs toward the deeper caves. Others gathered essential supplies. The elderly, including the matriarch, were helped along by younger members. Everyone moved with purpose and urgency, but not panic. This was organized, efficient, but Scout refused to leave Jake's side. Every time another Vixra tried to lead the young one away, Scout would break free and return to Jake. The young Vixra grabbed Jake's pant leg in those strong jaws and held on. Not biting, not hurting, just refusing to let go. The pack leader came over and growled at Scout. It was clearly an order, obey, go with the others, hide, but Scout just pressed closer to Jake and made a sound Jake had learned meant no or refuse. Jake knelt down and spoke softly to Scout. He said the young one needed to go with the pack. It would be safer in the deep caves. He gently tried to push Scout toward a group of youngsters being led into the darkness. Scout sat down and looked at Jake with all 6 eyes. The young Vixra made that refusing sound again. Then Scout grabbed Jake's leg and held on even tighter. The message was clear. Where Jake went, Scout would follow. They were bonded. That bond was not going to be broken even by danger. The pack leader watched this exchange. It looked at Scout. It looked at Jake. Something passed between the two adult Vixra. Some communication Jake could not quite interpret. Then the pack leader looked at Jake and made a sound that seemed to indicate acceptance or permission. Scout could stay with Jake. Jake said to Scout that the young one was putting itself in danger, but he promised he would keep Scout safe. No matter what happened, he promised. Over the next hours, Jake, Lisa, and Marcus helped the Vixra hide. They went deeper into the cave system than they had ever explored before. The passages grew narrow and dark. They had to climb down through tight spaces, but the Vixra moved through it all with confidence. They had obviously used these deep refuges before when facing danger. Finally, they reached chambers that were hundreds of meters underground. The rock above would block most see. The golden prospect came down from orbit like a predator diving toward prey. Its engines burned bright against the alien sky. Jake watched from his position on the ridge as the ship landed in a clearing about 2 kilometers from the den complex. The landing thrusters scorched the beautiful crystalline trees and burned away the glowing moss. It was a violation, an intrusion, a statement that these poachers cared nothing for this world or the life on it. The cargo bay doors opened with a hiss of hydraulics. 12 figures emerged into the afternoon light. They were armed and armored. Each one carried scanning equipment and capture gear, stun weapons designed to drop large animals without killing them, containment fields to trap and hold them, neural collars to keep them docile. Jake had seen these tools before. They were standard equipment for poachers who hunted intelligent species on survey worlds. Marcus whispered that they were not wasting any time. He and Jake and Lisa were hidden on a ridge overlooking the approach to the den. With them were the pack leader, Scout, and the 3 Vixra warriors. The Vixra were completely still, watching, waiting. Marcus said those were not merchants. Those were professional hunters. The way they moved, the way they covered each other. These people knew what they were doing. They had done this before. Jake's communicator was set to an open broadcast channel. Lisa had already established a link to the horizon. Everything that happened here was being recorded and transmitted directly to council servers. It was being sent on multiple frequencies that would reach every ship and station in range. Whatever happened next would have witnesses. Jake spoke clearly into his communicator. He identified himself as Commander Jake Morrison of the research vessel Horizon. He informed them they were in violation of council survey regulations. This planet was under scientific protection and biological quarantine protocols. They needed to leave the system immediately. A harsh laugh came back over the communication channel. The voice was rough and dismissive. It said, "Nice try, Morrison." The speaker said they had checked all the official records. This planet would not be fully classified for another 6 months. Until then, it was technically open territory. They were just here to collect some exotic specimens. Nobody would get hurt. "No problems," Lisa's voice cut in. She was broadcasting from the horizon. Her voice was sharp and professional. She stated clearly that the creatures on this planet were sentient beings. Capturing them would constitute kidnapping of intelligent persons under council law. The poacher's voice came back mocking. He said that was not how the law actually read. The creatures were classified as fauna until the council officially said otherwise. Right now they were just exotic animals. Valuable exotic animals. He told the humans they could make this easy by telling them where the creatures were hiding. Or they could make it difficult. Either way, the poachers were not leaving without their cargo. The lead poacher made a gesture. His team began moving toward the den complex. Their scanners were active, sweeping the area with sensor beams. The devices were sophisticated. They could detect life signs through rock and soil. But the deep caves where the Vixra hid were far enough down and shielded by enough mineral-rich stone that the readings would be confused. Uncertain, Jake watched the hunters approach. His hand rested on the pack leader's shoulder. The massive Vixra was trembling, not with fear but with barely controlled rage. Every instinct it had was screaming to attack, to defend, to drive these intruders away from its home. But it waited. It trusted Jake. It understood that timing mattered. The poachers reached the cave entrance. Their scanners indicated life signs deep underground, but the readings were scattered and unclear. The lead poacher was a man with a scarred face and cold eyes. He looked at his scanner display and frowned. Then he pulled out a different piece of equipment. Sonic resonators. Jake recognized them immediately and felt sick. The scarred man told his team to deploy the resonators. They would flush the creatures out. Sonic resonators sent out sound waves at frequencies designed to cause pain and disorientation in most species. They would not kill, but they would drive any living thing out of a cave system in desperate attempts to escape the agonizing noise. It was a brutal tool used by poachers across the galaxy, and it was completely legal to use on non-sentient animals. That was when the pack leader moved. Jake could not have stopped it even if he had wanted to. The huge Vixra exploded from the ridge with a roar that shook the air. It was pure rage-given voice, pure protective fury. The sound echoed off the cliff face and seemed to shake the very ground. The pack leader covered 40 meters in seconds. It was a blur of dark fur and flashing teeth. It hit the nearest poacher like a living battering ram. The man flew backward and slammed into the ground. He was not seriously hurt. The leader had pulled the strike, but he was definitely out of the fight. The scarred poacher shouted orders. Use the stunners. Take it down. Do not let it escape. Energy bolts crackled through the air. Bright blue streaks of electricity arced toward the pack leader. The massive Vixra dodged with incredible speed and grace, but there were too many shooters. One bolt caught the leader in the shoulder. The creature stumbled. Its roar turned into a sound of pain. But it did not fall. It stayed on its feet and bared its teeth at the poachers. The 3 Vixra warriors charged in to support their leader. They moved as a coordinated unit. One went left. One went right. One straight up the middle. The poachers were professionals, but they had expected to be capturing animals. They had not expected intelligent tactical fighting. Jake cursed under his breath. He could not let the Vixra fight alone. He would not. He jumped down from the ridge. Marcus was right beside him. Both of them had their stunners drawn. Lisa stayed at the observation point, making absolutely sure every moment was being recorded and transmitted. The scarred poacher called Kyle shouted at Jake to stand down. He said Jake was interfering with legal operations. He was breaking the law. Jake shouted back that there was nothing legal about what they were doing. He moved to stand beside the pack leader, who was breathing hard. Blood darkened the fur on the leader's shoulder where the stunner bolt had burned. Scout bounded down from the ridge to join them. The young Vixra took a protective stance directly in front of Jake. Scout was growling with all the ferocity its young body could produce, trying to be brave, trying to protect Jake the way Jake had promised to protect Scout. The poachers hesitated. This was not what they had expected at all. They had thought they would be facing simple animals. Instead, they were looking at humans defending those animals, and the animals themselves were fighting with clear intelligence and coordination. Several of the poachers looked uncertain. This was wrong, and they knew it. Kyle's face was hard. He said this was Jake's last chance. Walk away now, and they would pretend this never happened. But if Jake kept interfering, there would be consequences. Legal consequences. Criminal charges. Prison time. Jake looked at the pack leader, standing wounded but defiant. He looked at Scout, trying so hard to be brave despite being young and scared. He looked at the 3 warriors who had bled to protect their home. He thought about the matriarch in the deep caves, about all the cubs hiding in darkness, about 3 weeks of friendship and trust and belonging, about what it meant to be part of a family, part of a pack. Jake looked Kyle directly in the eyes and said one word. No, Kyle's fingers started to tighten on his weapon trigger. His face showed he meant it. He would shoot. He would kill if necessary. The profit from exotic specimens was worth murder to men like him. But before Kyle could fire, 3 things happened at almost exactly the same moment. First, the horizon dropped out of high orbit. The research vessel came screaming down through the atmosphere with its engines roaring. It was a move that violated about a dozen safety protocols, but it was dramatic and impossible to miss. Lisa's voice boomed over every communication channel. She stated clearly that council authorities had been notified. Everything was being recorded and transmitted. Every action. Every word. Fire on Commander Morrison and the poachers would be charged with attempted murder of a council officer, in addition to all their other crimes. Second, from the deep caves behind them came a sound. It started low and built in waves. Dozens of Vixra voices joining together. It was not random noise. It was structured, organized, musical. It was a song, complex and layered with clear mathematical patterns. Harmonies and rhythms that could only come from intelligent minds working together. The matriarch had led the hidden Vixra in a demonstration of their sentience, proof that could not be denied. The sound was being picked up by Lisa's equipment and broadcast across space, evidence that would change everything. Third Scout did something that made everyone freeze. The young Vixra stepped forward. It moved to position itself directly between Jake and Kyle's weapon. Then it sat down, calmly, deliberately, and it began to vocalize, but not in the normal Vixra way. Scout was trying to copy human speech, making sounds that approximated human words, trying to communicate the way it had heard Jake communicate, trying to talk. The effect on the poachers was immediate and profound. They were criminals, yes. They cared about profit more than morality, yes. But they were also human beings. And they were watching a young alien creature,